I feel very much humbled, and I am very grateful for this opportunity. Before I speak on the theme, let me start by informing the audience that due to the limited time factor, the final product of my paper has left out the global historical dimensions as reflected in the abstract that I sent out earlier on. My apology. This paper positions the TRC as a hope project with question marks in relation to 3 issues. TRC as space for a dialogue of hope, hope and restorative justice, hope in trustworthiness, and in conclusion, hope in trust and justice at TRC. This paper has framed the topic with question marks because, as you can understand, the TRC was and is still an elephant in the room. The introduction. The Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act number 34 of 1995 provided for the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa. It was designed as an organ that would facilitate a process of national dialogue. Commenting on the TRC, Frederica Bubenza stated, there was hope that the TRC, with its amnesty and reparations components, would enable South Africans to come to terms with their past on a morally acceptable basis and to advance the cause of reconciliation. What is hope? Emily Locke defined hope in terms of the past relationship with the future and assumes causality between the two. She stated that the rapport between the present and future that is implicit in hope projects the idea that present actions can influence the future. Thus, hope relates to what possibly can be achieved, what is possible and what is desirable. It is action-oriented. The TRC was designed as a national project of hope that could facilitate the nation into a new era of reconciliation. This was entailed in its processes as well as in its configuration of spaces. South Africans who had been for years on the opposite political divides would for the first time encounter each other in a public space. TRC as space for a dialogue of hope. The TRC embodying spaces configured hope. In its manifestations, a symbolic link between space and dialogue was projected to engender trust. Daniel Law links space and hope. He describes space as a resort for dwelling and a starting point for wandering. It is a place to rest as well as a region to be transcended, and presupposes a free space, a kind of hope, exposure to comfort and compassion. Symbolically, TRC homeliness and compassion was designed to be projected in its composition, which included clergy and religious functionaries of all faith persuasions, lawyers, men and women of varied professions, led by Archbishop Tutu. This religious dimension was crucial. In this regard, Law further conceptualized hope as a new state of being the bright side of trust and affirmation, where we as humans find protection. Law linking hope and protection is important. A TRC protection entailed the critical and difficult issue of dialogue. Report 1 of the TRC states, the process whereby the truth was reached was itself important. It was through dialogue and respect that a means of promoting transparency, democracy, and participation in society was suggested as a basis for affirming human dignity and integrity. Krasner denotes that trust is the keystone of the dialogic process, and hence the chief resource of human relationships. It is the result of the long-term consequences of one person's actual care for another person. It is the fuel that empowers people to risk relating after they have suffered injustices and estrangement. For as Nagy states, dialogue is more than having a disposition to one another on an emotional level. Rather, it implies a relationship in which fairness is part of the transaction. Central to this is the issue of equitability, a balance of rights and needs of persons involved in the dialogue. In other words, dialogue entails obligations and commitment to justice and a balance of rights. This relationship is embedded in the divine human covenantal relationship. Thus, trust and dialogue function in a reciprocal relationship. Krasner and Joyce stated that dialogue is endowed with a revelatory function, which is wholly dependent on the fact that its pre-existing stages of self-delineation and due consideration can invariably be linked to the inbuilt human longing, be held accountable for consideration owed and deserved. The issue of accountability was fundamental precisely because underlying it ran the intrinsic principle of restorative justice. Hope in restorative justice, according to Emily Moyne, the guiding principles and practices of restorative justice provide a strong foundation for TRCs. The philosophy of engaging the victim and offender in dialogue in order to construct a shared understanding of the conflict is central to the work of TRCs. The challenges of dealing with truth and reconciliation at TRC was underscored by Bishop Frank Retief of St. James Church in Kenilworth, Cape Town. His church, which was attacked by the Azanian People's Liberation Army on Sunday, 25th July 1993, where 11 worshippers were killed and more than 50 people were injured. Interviewed about his view of the TRC by the Cape Argus in October 1998, he stated, "There's nothing trite or easy about truth and reconciliation, not least for him, having struggled hard to live up to them, to bear them out." All three attackers were granted amnesty by the TRC. They said they were advancing their struggle, and compassion and commission accepted that. Retief battled with the concept. Our difficulty is that trials have not been held to determine whether they are guilty or not. Granting amnesty without a trial is assuming innocence. Granting amnesty after a trial is messy. But by granting amnesty without a trial, you are redefining ethics and personal responsibility is undermined. We feel that is fundamentally dehumanizing. However, Retief remained committed to the TRC processes. I think the hope of all South Africans is that this will bring closure to the past and lay all the ghosts to rest so that they'll be able to get on with their lives, finding each other and building a nation. That's our hope too. In this respect, hope defies despair. It transcends experience of human pain and suffering. It is hope in hope. Hope in trustworthiness. Pastoral care construe the concept of trust as the hub of relationships in the sense that trust is an asset. The major burden that the TRC had to deal with was the question of trust amidst different narratives of victims and perpetrators of atrocities. Who must be trusted and why? More fundamental lay the question, what is trust? How did the violence affect not only the individuals, but their communities? The Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation reports that many survivors also came to the TRC in hopes of finding new truth about the fate or whereabouts of loved ones, vesting hopes in particular in the amnesty processes, which promised the possibility of amnesty for full disclosure of the details of the crimes committed by perpetrators. That's one of the critical issues that the TRC had to confront in the process of investigation, was the notion of truth and truth-telling. Any prospect for success was therefore contingent on some truth-telling from the victim and perpetrators of violence. Nogi and Kresner asserted the importance of trustworthiness as a resource. They state, the areas of trustworthiness and mutuality of commitment offer people the most effective resource for hope, care, and fresh investments of goodwill. People's integrity and relationships hinge on trust and trustworthiness. Truth-telling is inseparable from the value of human dignity because of the inherent natural principle of accountability in human relationships. It deeply strikes the core of human relationships, what it means to be human. The issue of what constitutes truth is critical for any dialogue to take place. The TRC had to face this head on. The question was, what about truth and whose truth? The complexity of this concept also emerged in the debates that took place before and during the life of the Commission, resulting in four notions of truth: factual or forensic truth, personal or narrative truth, social or dialogic truth, and healing or restorative truth. The fact that the TRC had to contend with truth demonstrated the complexity of the concept. Truth is colored by deep social, cultural, and even religious perspectives in which we are all embedded. Illustrating the difficulty of defining and uncovering truth, Report 1 of the TRC quotes the words of a Dutch visitor who stated, the TRC must fail. Its task is simply too demanding. Yet, she argued, even as it fails, it has already succeeded beyond any rational expectation. The truth must dazzle gradually, or the world would be blind. Truth must dazzle because it comprises many complex dimensions, pieces that constitute the whole truth. Objective truth is almost impossible precisely because of the natural disposition of humans to be biased. Hence, pursuing the whole truth is a futile exercise. A good example that illustrates the difficulty of uncovering the truth relates to John Loeb, a captain in the police child protection unit. He told the Goldstone Commission that he believed that he had been divinely inspired to work with the TRC so that the truth could be told. In explaining why, he took all the original documentation and the crucial tape recording of the Mbaya case with him when he left TRC. He stated, he felt he could not trust anyone in that environment with the documentation. Trudy Gauffier and Willem Verwoerd have raised the question of trust and reconciliation, its complexities and promises in South African and other contexts in the world. They argue that trust is pivotal to the process of reconciliation because relationships are driven and inspired by trust issues. In their view, reconciliation is not an instant achievement, but rather it is an ongoing process whereby relationships are managed and sustained by trust. They have said that reconciliation as coming together after a rift, as the building of trust, clearly does not mean an achievement of complete agreement or harmony in relationships, even at the individual level. The issue of trust was critical at the TRC. Both the attitudes of the perpetrators and victims related to trust issues. Therese Abramson and Hugo van der Merwe have illustrated this regard to one episode that related to the perpetrators. According to Abramson and van der Merwe, the mistrust of the South African legal system was transferred to the work of the TRC. They cited an episode of a person who had killed due to racial hatred. This person said, I was negative towards the idea of the TRC. I thought it would just be a waste of time because there was no guarantee that you would get amnesty. Here I was in prison for having killed a white person. Then I thought that I would be asked something like, why did you do it? And I would have to explain to a white man that I was fighting against a white man for my land. So I dismissed the idea of going to the TRC. In this respect, lack of trust in the TRC seemed to diminish hope for a fair hearing. The issue of trust was intrinsically related to hope. Hence, to mistrust was to engender despair. The opposite was also true. Trust was essential in creating conditions which engender hope. It had to do with attitudes and perceptions which fostered inner disposition. At the core of this was the issue of relationships. However, at the next turn, the reluctant perpetrator changed his attitude towards the TRC. In his view, after the PAC President Stanley Makgoba had persuaded him to appear at the TRC. Finally, skepticism yielded to hope. In conclusion, hope in trust and justice at TRC. In conclusion, what do we make of hope, trust, and justice at TRC? The TRC offered a new set of symbols and images and even myths intended to engender trust and confidence and a sense of justice in its processes. First, there was a diversity of commissions in terms of race, faith, and profession, more or less fairly representative of the broader society. More importantly, these symbols, according to Audrey Chapman and Hugo van der Merwe, suggested a way of moving beyond divisive images and myths held by conflicting groups and to provide a new interpretive grid for past experiences. The symbols projected the notion of transcendence over division. It projected an image of South Africa as a rainbow nation. Commissioners, particularly Archbishop Tutu, was inclined to memorialize victims, interpreting their suffering through a framework of sacrifice for liberation, possibly to create heroes and martyrs, as well as a mythology for the new South Africa. This sought to appeal on an emotional as well as intellectual level. These new symbols and images were able to give meaning to the past and move the nation forward into a new future. The TRC signaled the facilitation of a process towards an open South African society. Its significance lay in initiating a process of dialogue about the past. As a national hope project, the TRC sought to give hope of a new start to a road of national reconciliation by seeking to carry out justice for the victims of apartheid and amnesty for the perpetrators. It was a hopeful project because it believed in human capacity to tell at least some truth nor was it completely oblivious to the capacity of the perpetrators to be less than truthful. It conceived its work as a process towards these objectives. Hence, on the most basic level, the primary objective of the TRC was that of reconciling a wounded nation in a way as to create space for facilitating the transition from a racially repressive white minority rule to South African-faced majoritarian democracy. Thank you. Badanki. Enkosi.